All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into Chapter 3 of the Class 9 Ncert economics textbook, Poverty as a Challenge, but we're looking at it through a UPSC lens. This chapter really builds the foundation for your GS mains papers, so let's get right into it.
So let's just dive right in. Poverty. It isn't just a statistic or some data point on a chart, right? It's a living, breathing, multidimensional reality. This image here really captures that story. A story of helplessness, poor health, and a real lack of opportunities. And it's a story that's lived by millions in India every single day.
To really put a face to this reality, let's meet Laka Singh. He's a landless laborer from a village out near Merit. Get this, he earns just 50 rupees a day to support his family of 8. His story, it's really going to help us understand all the different dimensions of poverty.
So here's how we're going to break this all down today. We're going to systematically explore this whole concept of poverty across 5 key sections. First, we'll look at its human face, then we'll get into how it's actually measured. After that, we'll zero in on its causes and the most vulnerable groups, analyze the government's strategies, and finally wrap up by discussing the challenges ahead.
Okay, kicking things off with our very first section, Poverty's Human Face. This is where we see what poverty actually looks like for the people who are living it. So, a lot like Laka Singh, the story of Shivaraman from Tamil Nadu shows us even more layers of poverty. He can only find work for about 5 to 6 months a year. And look at this, we also see a clear gender wage gap. His wife gets paid less for doing the exact same work. What's more, there are inequalities within the family itself. They can manage to get milk for their son, but they can't afford to educate their daughters.
Okay, so we've seen the human side of poverty, we've felt the personal stories, now let's kind of switch gears to the analytical perspective. How exactly do social scientists and economists measure something like this? How do you even begin to quantify something so complex?
Well, the most central concept you've got to understand is the poverty line. Think of it as a benchmark, a minimum level of income or consumption that you need to meet your basic needs. If you fall below this imaginary line, you're considered poor. Now, it's really important to remember this isn't some fixed line. It's a theoretical idea that changes with time and place. And trust me, it's often the subject of some pretty intense debate among various committees, from Tendulkar to Rangarajan.
So for 2011-12, for example, the poverty line was different for rural and urban areas. In rural areas, the calorie requirement was set higher, at 2,400 calories, which makes sense, right? It reflects more physical labor. But the income threshold was actually higher in urban areas, 1,000 rupees per month, and that was to account for the higher cost of living in cities.
But here's the thing. Poverty is about so much more than just a lack of income. A really key concept here is social exclusion. This is a process where the poor are often shut out from the facilities, the benefits, and the opportunities that better-off people just take for granted. A classic example in India is how the caste system can deny equal opportunities to certain groups.
And that brings us right to a related concept, vulnerability. This basically describes the higher probability that certain communities, think widows or members of backward castes, have of becoming poor or staying poor in the future. You can almost think of it as risk exposure. When a crisis hits, like a natural disaster or someone losing a job, these vulnerable groups are always hit the hardest.
This leads us perfectly into our next section, where we're going to identify India's most vulnerable groups and really dig into the root causes of poverty.
And the data here is, well, it's stark. While the average poverty ratio in India is around 22%, look how it jumps to 29% for scheduled castes and an absolutely alarming 43% for scheduled tribes. And this isn't just a coincidence. It clearly shows us that poverty in India has a really deep-seated social dimension, linked to historical disadvantage and exclusion.
So the crucial takeaway here is that poverty doesn't have one single cause. It's this complex web of factors that creates a vicious cycle, something often called a poverty trap. You've got historical reasons, like the stagnation of our economy under British rule. You have structural reasons, like the unequal distribution of land and massive income inequalities. And there are even sociocultural factors, like high spending on ceremonies, which can push families right into a debt trap.
So, what about the solutions? The Indian government's strategy to fight poverty has, for a long time, been based on 2 main pillars. Let's break down this 2-pronged approach.
The first pillar is promoting economic growth. The basic idea is that a rising tide lifts all boats. As the economy grows, it creates opportunities and resources that should reduce poverty.
The second pillar is made up of targeted anti-poverty programs, which are designed to directly help the poorest of the poor.
Now, among these programs, the most significant one is probably the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, or MGNREGA, which was launched back in 2005. This act was a real game changer because it marked a shift from a welfare-based model to a rights-based one. It guarantees 100 days of wage employment, which makes it a powerful example of a right-to-work approach to fighting poverty.
And besides MGNRGA, there have been several other schemes launched over the years. These include programs like the PMRY, which was aimed at promoting self-employment for educated youth, and the SGSY, which focused on organizing the poor into self-help groups to bring them above the poverty line.
But here's the thing. The results of all these programs, they've been mixed. Their effectiveness has really been held back by a few key issues. The biggest challenges have been a lack of proper implementation and just poor targeting. That means the benefits often don't even reach the people they're meant for because of leakages and inefficiencies.
So, where do we go from here? What are the challenges that are still ahead of us? It's becoming really clear that the focus has to shift now, beyond just making sure people have a minimum subsistence level. The very concept of poverty itself is getting broader.
And this is where economists are now really emphasizing the concept of human poverty. This approach looks way beyond just income. It includes things like a lack of education, poor access to healthcare, no job security, and a lack of gender equality. It's a much more holistic, a much more comprehensive way of understanding what it means to be deprived.
You know, as Mahatma Gandhi famously said, India would be truly independent only when the poorest of its people become free of human suffering. He was pointing towards this exact idea of human poverty, a concept that's tied not just to economics, but to human dignity itself.
So, this explainer leaves you with a really critical question to think about, especially as a future policymaker. Is focusing only on economic growth enough to get rid of poverty in India, or does tackling this bigger idea of human poverty require a more direct, multi-pronged attack on our deep-rooted social and political structures? Give that some serious thought. We'll see you in the next explainer.